at the end of the day, we're trying to capture people's attentions and kind of teach them something or share some information with them. And the easiest way to do that is to get their attention in the first place. So the having something that sort of gets your brain going and gets you engaged is the way that we can succeed at what we do as data storytellers.
Hey nerds, Monica here. Welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, where we talk to amazing professionals and ask them all about how they're using data to solve the world's problems. We're highlighting all the tips, tricks, and nerdy fun bits to make you the best data professional you can be. Today with us, we have David Cohen. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on the show. So we typically start off our episodes by understanding people's origin stories. So if you could please tell us about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I've been in the data world for over a decade now, professionally speaking, but I've always really had a sort of or gravitated towards data in general before I even started working professionally. So I studied economics in college and always had sort of an inclination or interest in data work and just in numbers as a whole. I After college, I started working in the strategy consulting field, so working big consulting for a long time. And in that kind of journey to navigate that world, learned a lot from a lot of great people in the data space and that work in consulting and that use it to really help clients understand their strategy and how to operate through insights and through just general change. So it's been a very interesting journey to kind of navigate that world.
Yeah. How do you leverage your background in economics? How does that feed through to strategy and consulting?
Yeah, well, so the reality of how it ended up working out for me, right, is that it's a very natural sort of progression from the way that economics works in an academic setting and the way you kind of think about the world and how you think about doing your job in consulting. And at the end of the day, consulting is primarily about understanding trends and problems in connecting the dots, if you will, between things that seem unrelated. And in many ways, an economics background is the same way. It's like, you're connecting sort of points between your perceptions about the way that people sort of react to the world and the way they behave, primarily from a money standpoint and from a just general operational standpoint, and how they interact with each other. So it's very similar in many respects.
Yeah. So then the data comes into play when you're looking at trends and you're trying to analyze what's going on. What other like deep data stuff are you involved in?
Yeah, so I've developed my career primarily in two main fields, right? One is data and analytics strategy, so it's like helping understand or helping clients understand the what we call the data lifecycle and how they navigate basically the end to end of how do I prepare my data, how do I make sure that it's governed appropriately, that it exists in the right place, and from my passion, my expertise is how do I tell better data stories with it, and how do I affect change in others through the way that I tell stories with data?
Okay. So then with the data storytelling, tell me more about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm most passionate about, right, is really bringing some of the capabilities of visual storytelling and data visualization in helping drive strategic change for the clients that I work with in my space, right? The strategy consulting space is traditionally very let's call it one-sided, in that there's like a sort of advisory capacity that you sort of provide your insights to your clients and you kind of help them navigate their business problems. My expertise and the thing that I'm the most passionate about is how do we use data as a story driver to understand and communicate the way that things should be, right? And the way that things kind of can evolve into. So from the perspective of telling better data stories is how do we use data visualization? How do we sort of use the concepts around collaboration and co-creation with our clients to help navigate strategic change and to tell better stories through it.
Yeah. I would see Do you have a struggle when you're working between the two? Because when I think of strategy, that's more of the very serious, more, we'll call it boring side of it. But
Yeah.
then when you're trying to tell the story, obviously you want to bring a more artful, innovative, or interesting way to tell that story. So how do you kind of like shift that mindset?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about some of my personal interests, right? But the artful side of data storytelling is what I call it, is that data work is traditionally a very, as you said, boring job in that you just take data sets and you turn them into something, typically a dashboard, a tool, or something. So from a strategic perspective, it's how do we make activities or interactive sort of perspectives that are fun and that drive conversations that are insightful and still professional and engaging, but are able to engage and navigate discussions around probably topics that are difficult to navigate from an organizational perspective in a sort of engaging, positive, and friendly way, right? Such that you still achieve your professional outcome from a data perspective, and you're still able to use data tools in a very active, or rather proactive way. But you're able to have fun while doing it. That's really what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah. So then another jump would be, so you have your data storytelling, you're telling a very interesting, captivating story, but then what? How do you bridge over to making that actionable for the audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the what typically happens in a consultative setting, right, is that your data stories or data tools turn into action via, as you said, very intentional planning and very intentional sort of outcomes or projects that follow on from whatever insights you discovered. So as you go through the process of having conversations about, our organization's operational model or an organization's like capabilities in the data space, or whether they want to enable AI or whatever iteration of it is, it turns from here's the business need to here is what the data and AI can help us solve to do that, and the plan that enables that in reality is the output of the work that I do, right? So going from we have a problem to here's how we solve that problem is the important part, as you said, and it's the most fascinating part about what I do, really.
It's very human centered. You talked about we talked previously, and you talked about human centered design.
Yeah.
Can you kind of deep dive into that? What exactly does that mean, and how do you achieve that?
Yeah, so human-centered design and design thinking are sort of related, probably, philosophies in how you design things. And traditionally, those concepts are primarily used in areas like UI, UX design, just people that design actual products that others use. What we find or have found over the course of time in the consulting space is that using those types of methodologies to develop better strategies helps in having a co-creative conversation with our clients and the people that we work with in general that actually meets their need. Because at the end of the day, a philosophy like human-centered design is focused around how do we meet the user's needs in the end, and how do we build things that actually meet their goals of whatever the person using them has in reality.
Hmm.
What tends to happen in a data context primarily is that, especially as data nerds, we tend to build things that are not, they're for us and not for the user, if that makes sense. And
Yes.
so as a longtime data visualization sort of practitioner and builder, the transformation that I went through in my career was to go from building things that I thought were cool to building things that others found useful. And those are not necessarily always the same. And it's important to go through that sort of transition of how do we, at the end of the day, keep in mind what's important for the user, and how do we build things that are relevant to them and that actually enact change and help them to be better at their jobs.
Yeah. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that that end product is going to be used? Because a lot of us have seen the, scenario where you build out a dashboard, you hand it over to the business, and nobody ever uses it. So how do you make sure that people do use it?
So at a conceptual level, it's all about listening, right? So the reality of how we build in the data space and how we think about building tools is that there's often like an ask from somebody, like let's say Monica asks David to build a dashboard. And then typically David just builds on that ask without going back to Monica to check in what she actually meant or needed. So the reality of what ends up happening is that the final product doesn't necessarily meet what Monica really wanted. It meets just David's interpretation of what Monica's ask originally was. So what I do tactically, right, is to build, as I said, sort of collaborative settings that enable you and I, or multiple people, or a group of people, to have a collaborative space to really have and hammer in on the questions that answer the why. Like, why are we using this tool? Or why do we need it? Why have we failed in the past? That sort of type of thing, where we can have a discussion around, okay, the purpose of building this tool in the first place is to solve X problem, and it's going to solve it in Y way. So the reality of the tool and how it grows over time is actually meeting a need and doesn't get thrown in the bin after the first time that it gets used, because it actually required listening to the user and engaging them in a conversation or conversations to actually understand what they needed and build something that's useful to them long term.
Yeah. So then I'm assuming that you really build those types of products together with the stakeholders.
Correct. Yeah. So primarily that takes the form of workshops usually. So, I set up collaborative workshops with my clients and other partners to help navigate that journey. Right. So that takes many different forms across the types of clients that I work with. So it can be anything from let's build a pitch deck together to let's build an operational model for data, or let's build a data governance program, or let's build a dashboard or a business strategy. The form itself, or the final form, is indistinct, but sort of the connecting tissue across all of them is that collaborative setting of let's do a workshop that actually brings everybody together. Uh, the cool thing is that in what I do, bringing some of that data visualization and visual storytelling enables everybody to participate, and it makes, in an organization that's large, typically it makes everybody feel that they've been heard, because the
Mm-hmm.
biggest challenge in data storytelling and in building data tools in larger organizations is that there's not just one stakeholder or one person that wants to use those tools and wants to navigate using data. There's often several, and many of those people don't feel like they're listened to on a day-to-day perspective, or especially from reporting and narrative building. So bringing them into those collaborative settings really helps on that front as well.
So when you're bringing people in for those collaborative workshops, what have you learned works best, and how to like structure the workshop itself?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is not having an ego as the person that builds them, right? Because you have this structure or idea of how a collaborative workshop should work, and as I was talking about earlier, you sort of have an idea of what the data story kind of should look like. And what you find in this sort of setting is it takes you places that you don't didn't realize you were going to go in when you started. And having everybody in a virtual or physical room kind of drives the conversation into unexpected places, where if you thought the problem was you wanted to build this thing, it actually grows into something much larger and is able to expand into something much more impactful, just because you brought everybody into the room. So, not having an ego kind of about the structure of the workshop and being flexible about how it works and what it produces is really the biggest thing.
Okay. And do you have any, like, I guess, lessons learned that you can share on what not to do?
Yeah, so a lot. The the biggest one being that um, you have to stay out of the way, right? When you are part of this setting, and when you're building a sort of collaborative space for data stories, it's pretty easy to get involved in the story yourself and to try to navigate it and direct it in whichever way. The biggest lesson that I've learned is that you have to sort of remove yourself while still managing sort of the conversation and driving the discussion. You have to
Mhm.
let the story kind of grow organically and build itself, as opposed to you inserting your own idea of what it is. Because at the end of the day, as data practitioners, we have sort of a perspective on many things. We have opinions, the same way everybody else does. So kind of being unbiased about what the conversation is and where it's leading from a strategy perspective, from a data perspective, and even from a human one, is it's important to kind of remove yourself from the conversation and have the ability to see it from the big picture standpoint as opposed to the very narrow one, which is typically what my clients do, because at the end of the day they care about their business problems, not so much about the big picture problems for the most part. So the your job as that person that sets that collaborative and open setting is to help them arrive at that big picture sort of thinking.
Very interesting. So I think that this is a really good segue into our fun bits.
Yeah.
So, particularly, I brought up the lessons learned because usually you have these lessons learned from failures.
Yeah.
And you specifically mentioned that you have an appreciation for failures because of your background in skateboarding.
Yeah, correct. So early in my college time, I picked up skateboarding. And what I learned through that experience was that sort of failure is inevitable and imminent everywhere. Gravity's not your friend when you're on a skateboard. So the reason I really enjoy that, right, is that it sort of provides a creative outlet for many things. I'm a, obviously have an appreciation for the more creative side of things in general. But really the sort of ethos, if you will, of skateboarding is learning from failure and, kind of getting better progressively over time. Whether, in whatever form it takes. So if you're somebody that just likes skateboarding and hanging around that sort of people, the people that like it and do that, um, building those basic skills to get better at something was something that was very instructional in my own life. And I don't skateboard anymore, but it kind of instills some aspects in me about what it means to fail in your life and what it means to get better at something, right? So from a perspective of what we do in the data space is that we tend to fail a lot too, right? We tend to build things that don't meet the purpose, or we tend to build strategies that don't actually meet what the clients need or our teammates need. And so it's all about how do we address that failure and get better at what we do by just becoming a more or an improved version of ourselves.
What's your biggest lessons learned from skateboarding?
The ground is hard. No, I was having a funny conversation with somebody about this recently. So there's a video somewhere deep in the internet out there of me trying to skateboard on the Great Wall of China, which I actually took my skateboard to do this, and it was like a life dream of mine, and I almost fell off because it was dangerous, all like cobblestones and stuff. So
Oh my
the
gosh.
it's a very funny video, and it was a very beautiful experience. I would recommend it for everybody. That's if you've never been, it's a cool place. But just in general, the biggest lesson learned from that is, you know, like I said before, gravity's not your friend.
Mm-hmm. So, is this video publicly available?
No, and probably will
Okay.
never be.
All right. All right. That's fair.
I think it's better if you don't see me falling repeatedly.
That's fair. I was just gonna, link it in the show notes, but if it's not publicly
No,
available,
no,
that's
I
okay.
don't think anybody wants to see that.
So you've learned a lot from skateboarding,
Yeah,
specifically how to appreciate failure and the fact that you can really grow from learning from your failures.
yeah.
Um, what about your background as a photographer? What have you learned from that? Tell us about that background, what you did, and then what your takeaways and learnings are.
Yeah, so before I started working professionally in the data world, I was a photographer, and I still am. I do it, for fun and as a hobby. But I've been doing photography for now like 20, 25 years almost. And really, it's something that I've always gravitated to from like the visual storytelling side of things. What I really love about photography is that it captures the way things are, right? Like it captures moments and it kind of tells stories through a much more interactive medium than in many ways writing does. And I mean, I'm still a fan of books and stuff like that, but definitely love the power of images to kind of showcase how things are and what happens around you. So ever since I picked up a camera, it's just been sort of a natural inclination to let's capture the world around me and what it is and how it looks like and how others interact with each other and the cool things that they're doing.
What stories are you telling with your photos?
So these days, it's primarily the opportunities that I get to travel and go to cool places and like do new interesting things, right? So the all the art in my house, for instance, is like all the places that we visit when we travel, and all the photos that I take as we travel and do different things. See different landmarks across the world or people that we meet or interact with in our trips. So it's sort of an interesting and like neat progression over time because you sort of see how your own style evolves as you grow and get better at it, but also as your tastes change. Right. One thing that I've noticed, it's true in my work, but also in my photography, is that my style personally has changed quite a bit over the years to reflect who I am as a person now and how I have gotten better at what I do in many ways.
Yeah. What currently is your style?
I'd like to say that my style is very sort of realistic, if that makes sense. So not quite like photojournalism, right? But my impression or favorite sort of photography is where it reflects the way that things look in a very slightly like dramatic kind of way. So like if you know not overly stylized, but definitely an enhanced version of the way that things really look. And if I showed you a picture, it would make more sense. But it's basically vibrant colors, sort of composition settings that are more striking than if you're looking at something straight on or a person straight on. And there's sort of a story that's being told there beyond just the way that things looked whenever you took the photo, if that makes sense. So the from a people standpoint, it's like sort of interesting settings of people doing cool things or in a cool moment in their life. And then from a if you're taking a landscape or a building or whatever, there's sort of an interesting sort of either color story or just general composition story being told.
Do you have, how do you share your photos? Do you have a specific page?
So I used to have a website. I now just do it on Instagram, so my personal Instagram. So if anybody's interested, I guess you can hit me up and I'll send it to you and you can follow me there. I don't primarily publicize my photography that much these days because it's more just for me rather than for professional settings. I guess one thing that I find is that when I do it professionally, the photography is kind of not the same vibe for me anymore. So I mean, I have a different career, and so the photography really is an outlet for me in many ways.
Yeah.
And having to do that for a job kind of takes away from some of that outlet. So I'm happy to share with whoever wants to see that. I'm always happy to share my photography and my photos with people if they want to see the stuff I've done. But it's primarily my private Instagram these days.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I totally understand when you're doing something for work, it definitely is a different type of task. Like it
Yeah.
changes entirely. But what I've also noticed is that people do have, of course, their personal hobbies, and somehow they do still kind of bleed into their professional lives in that
Yeah.
it will help them in some sort of way. So I guess how has photography or even skateboarding helped you in your data consulting, strategy, storytelling, professional life?
Yeah. So what you said is very true, right? There is like bleed, I would call it, into the more creative aspects of your life, whatever form that takes, into the way that you think about your work. So there's sort of a perspective of not only the outcome of the work that you're doing in the short term, but how you're telling and connecting with people and getting them to understand an outcome. So from a strategy perspective is how do I connect with my clients and how do I think about the way they think, and how do I give them a message that actually lands. So from a creative storytelling perspective, it's also how do I share a story with the world as a professional and in branding myself that is different, that is differentiated, that is unique, and that kind of brings the parts that make you you, and that really shine your value to either the market, to potential jobs and interviews that you're doing or whatever, or just in general for yourself, right? Like how do you present yourself and how do you communicate with others in a way that is effective. So the interesting part is that creative side often gets overlooked in a data perspective. Like there's a lot of people out there that are doing very, very cool data viz work, for instance, that take some of those creative aspects and some of those graphic design aspects, um, because they themselves have an appreciation for good art, right? Like it's at the end of the day, we're trying to capture people's attentions and kind of teach them something or share some information with them. And the easiest way to do that is to get their attention in the first place. So the having something that sort of gets your brain going and gets you engaged is the way that we can succeed at what we do as data storytellers.
So it seems like you have a lot of hobbies that help you with the creative side of your professional life. Do you have any hobbies that really pull your data nerd out and shine?
Yeah, so I'm a long time fantasy sports player. Specifically, I'm a fantasy baseball fan and have been for a long time. And if any of you watching this are baseball fans, they'll relate to the fact that it's a sport that's extremely data heavy. So, in fact, probably one of the forerunners of analytics in sports. So that field and that sort of experience has really helped me to connect those dots the same way. Like I'm passionate about obviously hanging out with my friends and enjoying sort of a shared interest, but also having that muscle in my professional life of like I like data and I like telling data stories and I like using that in my work also helps because I get better at playing those fantasy games or I get better at enjoying and having a different perspective on that experience from a personal standpoint too. So it bleeds in a very positive way, right? In that it kind of goes into the aspects that I like about data in my in the way I interact with my hobbies too.
That's really cool. So you like games, right? You mentioned that you're working on a game show.
Yeah, so it's very, very early stages. We're calling it's not even at
Okay.
like pilot stage. But yeah, so I'm very passionate about, like I said, creating fun settings for people to share with each other, and especially from a professional setting, the data stories angle. I feel that there's a space for data professionals, data nerds, and just in general people that like interacting with others to talk about their professional careers in a way that is engaging, that is sort of fun, but also brings people together in more than just a traditional one-on-one podcast setting. Um,
Yeah.
because obviously shows like this one are very well covering that space already, and there's like a that space is got a lot of great people doing that sort of work like yourself. So I wanted to, or I am working on creating basically a game show, like you said. I mean, it doesn't officially have a name yet, but what it is it'll be, primarily gamified activities around let's discuss who we are in our work, what we think about our particular industries, and how do we think through connecting the dots between different people and what they bring to the table, right? So it'll be a very
Mm.
the idea is for it to be a very positive atmosphere where we can share thoughts about how we think about the world. Like you and I are both data nerds, and so we have things in common, but we also have things that make us unique, like I said before. So bringing in data as a reflection or as an amplifier of those through gamification, through games, is something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm working on defining what that looks like in reality. More details to come soon, but it'll be probably an expansion of some other stuff I'm working on as well. I'm just hoping that obviously people are engaged in the concept as I get it out there, and obviously that folks sign up to participate because obviously I'll need more people to play the games.
Absolutely. I would be very much interested in helping you out and playing your game show. Is there any other details you can provide? Like is it like what type of game show it is, or like are there prizes or anything?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. Right, I think that the basic story is that it's going to be low stakes in like a very funny way, right? So like the prize would be something that's like handmade by me, and then you get like a little hand drawn picture of yourself or something if you win.
I love that.
But the reality of it, right, is that the setting is more just about the conversation and the back and forth. So it's really taking inspiration from. There's a lot of sort of game shows and just general discussion shows out there in many forms that are more about the setting, providing sort of a spotlight for people to share the things that they really care about and that they find cool. And what I really appreciate is learning about what others find cool in the first place. That's, for instance, why I'm here on this show. So the what I want to do is have the ability to showcase the power of collaboration in those settings, right? So not just you and I having a conversation, but also having three more people on here that are able to learn from each other and build together. So as you think through from a professional setting, which will be the focus of the show, is how do we connect people that are in similar industries, and how do we bring them together to have a conversation that's co-creative, that is fun, that is engaging, and that uses data as a driver of conversation around what we do, right? Like, or how we get better at what we do, whether that's an industry in particular or a functional interest or aspect of what we do. So more to come, I guess.
Yes, I'm very excited to hear more.
Yeah.
You talked about it being sort of heavy on learning, right? And so, segue into a question that I ask all of my guests around learning. So, when you are having to learn new things, what is your approach? Like, what are your go to resources?
Yeah, I think in kind of listening to some of the other episodes and people that have gotten this question too, I definitely agreed with them many of them that they talked about just doing things, and that's really similar to what I do, right? And it's that I take a very passionate approach when I get where I like obsess over something new, and I try to just get it right. And I think that's very true. The reality of how we all learn is that it's very momentum based. So the just doing something and being able to kind of incrementally get better at it is significantly more effective than setting yourself a big goal and never accomplishing it, right? So how I learn and do new things is I just try to do something and I fail, and then I get slightly better at it and go again, and just repeat the cycle until I'm decently okay at it, right? And then I can learn from others. One other thing that I'm also passionate about is learning actively from other people. So like, using their perspectives as a guidance and mentorship for myself. So obviously many others have done the things that I have in mind, and they've faced challenges in their own way. Just like being on this show for me is part of the experience, because I'm building this game show idea thing, or I'm doing a lot of work in the data strategy or whatever space, and then you are going through that same journey yourself. So being here kind of helps me learn through that as well.
That's awesome. I love that you incorporated the failure into your learning journey because, again, I think that's so important.
Yeah, I think what you learned is that, every time that it happens, and especially in the data world, right? Failure and not communicating properly feels very final, and it feels very like monumental. And the reality of it, especially in the work that we do in data, is that data work is very iterative. And iterative work requires constant failure just by nature, because it requires you to not achieve the outcome that you had in mind, work through why you didn't get there, and then make it better, right? So the failure is not intrinsically a bad thing. It's just something that happens in the process of getting to the final product. And the final product at the end of the day continues to evolve over time. Like it's not like you had, for example, you're building a dashboard or a data tool, and then you go from your idea to the final version, and then that's it forever. Typically, in professional settings, dashboards and data tools or AI tools or whatever they are grow organically over time as people start to use them, and as the purpose of them changes, and as you sort of learn about how people are using them, both from a usability perspective, accessibility, design, whatever. There's an ongoing process of them evolving that requires failure to get better at. Whether that's good or not is up to the designer or the person making them to decide, really. But failure is just a normal part of the growth process, and it's something to accept and build on.
So, do you have any other final tips, recommendations, or words of encouragement for the listeners out there?
Yeah, I think one thing I would share in terms of encouragement, right, is that I feel that us in the data community are relatively tight knit group, right, and we love sort of sharing with each other, and that. So because, like I said, I'm a big proponent of those co-creative settings, that I would encourage everybody to get in touch with somebody else in the community, just like we're doing here, right? If you want to reach out to me, I'm always available and happy to chat with anybody from any setting in the data world or otherwise. And the like I said, the process of being better at data is just about experimenting and trying fun new things and being not afraid to put yourself out there and try something new. And like I said, in the many creative settings that I sort of have experienced over the years, it's all about, well, let me try this new cool thing and see what it leads me to. And maybe I learn something or maybe I don't. And that journey of kind of improving over time is what makes sort of a professional life or professional setting worth it, and how you get better at what you do, and that you sort of take a different path than you originally had envisioned for yourself. So in a data career, that means a different type of role or a different type of job or whatever that kind of takes you in a direction that you didn't expect. And in my experience, at least, that leads to a lot of positive places that you could have never anticipated going into.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much, David, for coming on the show and sharing all of your insights with us.
Sure, I'd be more than happy to be here, and like I said, it's been a really cool experience to share with you for sure.
Absolutely. If any of the audience members have any questions for you, where can they find and or follow you?
So I'm posting a lot more on LinkedIn these days. So if you guys are on there, and most of them will see this content there, please reach out to me there. I'm more than happy to have a conversation, like I mentioned. Just follow me there. You can also reach out to me via email or whichever other form which is available on my page. So primarily it's on there. Like I said, always happy to chat and have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And as always, folks, happy learning. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Data Podcast for Nerds. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you want to transition your career and become a data professional, follow me on LinkedIn for even more tips, tricks, and nerdy fun bits.